Trump's tariffs backfire. Canada and Mexico forge new trade routes. Full reactions and analysis. In early 2025, President Donald Trump imposed sweeping tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico, aiming to reduce trade deficits and address issues related to immigration and drug trafficking. The strategy, intended to pressure both countries economically, had the opposite effect. Instead of weakening trade partners, it spurred Canada and Mexico to strengthen bilateral cooperation and explore alternative trade routes that bypass U.S. barriers. This move signaled a historic shift in North American trade dynamics, illustrating the limitations of unilateral protectionist measures and the increasing importance of regional economic resilience. Canada has long been the United States' largest trading partner, with bilateral commerce encompassing energy, forestry, automotive parts, and agricultural goods. Over decades, these interdependent trade networks have facilitated economic growth on both sides of the border. Canada's forestry sector, for instance, valued at $63 billion, relies heavily on U.S. markets, historically exporting up to 40% of its products southward. While tariffs have occasionally created friction, they rarely prompted Canada to consider significant structural changes in its supply chains or partnerships. The new tariffs, however, posed unprecedented economic and political challenges. Mexico's trade with the United States is similarly shaped by the USMCA, which replaced NAFTA in 2020. Mexican exports, including automotive, electronics, and agricultural products, enter the U.S. duty-free under the agreement, fostering economic stability. While Mexico's economy is highly export-dependent, the USMCA framework has historically offered protection against unilateral U.S. tariffs. However, occasional impositions, particularly in steel, aluminum, and automotive sectors, have tested this resilience. Despite these challenges, over 85% of Mexico's exports to the U.S. remain duty-free, softening the impact of Trump's new tariffs. On February 1, 2025, Trump signed executive orders imposing 25% tariffs on most Canadian and Mexican imports, with a 10% rate applied to Canadian energy products. Canada and Mexico responded with retaliatory tariffs, though Mexico delayed implementation until March 6, 2025, exempting certain USMCA-compliant goods. The tariffs caused immediate disruptions. Canada's forestry exports plummeted from 30 to 40% to just 10% of their U.S. destinations, prompting major producers like Domtar and Interfor to reduce operations. Mexico faced economic uncertainty, but remained somewhat insulated due to the USMCA's provisions. The measures, intended to coerce compliance, instead catalyzed deeper collaboration between Canada and Mexico. Initial negotiations between the United States and its northern and southern neighbors failed to resolve tensions. Canada initially attempted to align with the U.S., distancing itself from Mexico in the process. This strategy backfired, straining relations with Mexico at a time when coordinated action was essential. Friction over fentanyl, immigration, and the imposition of steep tariffs intensified the need for alternative solutions. Mexican public consultations regarding the USMCA began, but the process was slower than anticipated, leaving both countries exposed to the uncertainties of escalating U.S. trade aggression. Amid these tensions, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney visited Mexico to meet President Claudia Sheinbaum. Their discussions focused on rebuilding trust, deepening economic cooperation, and exploring trade solutions that reduce dependency on U.S. routes. The Mexico City meeting coincided with preparatory talks for the 2026 USMCA review and marked Carney's first official visit to Mexico as Prime Minister. Both leaders emphasized maintaining trilateral cooperation while signaling their intent to develop independent trade pathways, illustrating a proactive response to U.S. protectionism. The resulting Canada-Mexico Action Plan commits to strengthening bilateral trade across multiple sectors, including infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and maritime logistics. Central to the agreement is the $120 billion Northern Corridor project, a comprehensive infrastructure initiative creating direct rail and maritime trade routes that bypass U.S. tariffs. Public consultations in Mexico and Canada will gather stakeholder input to support the 2026 USMCA review, ensuring that policies reflect the evolving realities of North American trade. The agreement positions both nations to expand trade and investment opportunities while reducing vulnerability to unilateral U.S. actions. The Northern Corridor effectively defies Trump's tariff wall by creating routes that circumvent U.S. markets. This initiative reduces reliance on traditional pathways, promotes cleaner, more cost-effective transport, and demonstrates that tariffs alone cannot dictate regional trade flows. By diversifying routes and infrastructure, Canada and Mexico are building a more resilient trade network capable of withstanding external pressures and geopolitical uncertainty. Reactions to the Mexico City Agreement have been strongly positive, with analysts, diplomats, and trade experts praising Canada for correcting its earlier misstep of isolating Mexico. The renewed partnership strengthens bilateral economic ties, diversifies trade routes, and reduces vulnerabilities from U.S. tariffs. Projects like the $120 billion Northern Corridor, combined with public consultations ahead of the 2026 USMCA review, demonstrate a coordinated long-term strategy. Economists view the plan as a sustainable solution that lowers U.S. dependency and sets a model for deeper regional economic cooperation across North America. President Trump is expected to react critically, portraying the agreement as an attempt to circumvent his tariff strategy and undermine American leverage in regional trade negotiations. The administration may consider imposing additional tariffs, enacting stricter regulatory measures, or leveraging political pressure to assert influence. However, with the Northern Corridor and other alternative trade routes becoming operational, along with strengthened regulatory and infrastructure coordination between Canada and Mexico, enforcement of such measures becomes increasingly challenging. These developments limit the U.S.'s ability to directly influence Canadian and Mexican trade decisions and highlight the potential long-term consequences of aggressive unilateral trade policies, which in this case have unintentionally strengthened North American economic integration and resilience. The consequences of the Mexico City Agreement are profound. Canada and Mexico diversify supply chains, reduce dependency on the U.S., and strengthen infrastructure and bilateral economic ties. The U.S. may experience diminished leverage, particularly in sectors like energy, automotive, and steel. Internationally, the initiative demonstrates that countries confronted with protectionist policies may pursue regional cooperation and resilience, potentially inspiring similar strategies worldwide. The Northern Corridor and Canada-Mexico Action Plan mark a pivotal moment in trade strategy, diplomacy, and North American economic integration, highlighting the unintended consequences of unilateral tariffs and the power of collaborative regional solutions. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for latest updates.